Good morning again. So, I was thinking if you were here for our Dream Team huddle this morning, Pastor Caden was asking us about our favorite worship songs and things that were, meaningful to us in that way. And I was thinking last week, if you weren't here, Caden spoke for us, and it was awesome. Thank you. I don't know where he is right now, but thank you for allowing me to be able to be with family last weekend in Tennessee. I went to my 5-year-old niece's birthday party, so it was awesome. But as we were listening to that last song, I Speak Jesus, I was thinking of last week when Caden was talking about the different names of God, and he talked about like how sometimes we don't think about how kind of heavy that is, and we don't look at the weight of God sometimes. And because of his sermon last week, I totally listened and sang that song a little bit differently this time, because when we speak Jesus, we don't just speak the name of Jesus. We think about all the different names he had and the authority that comes with that we can come and speak the name of Jesus over our family, over our friends. And I think that is just, sometimes we don't realize how important that is, and how much honor comes with that we have the ability to do that. So that was just freebie this morning, but it just kind of got me this morning thinking about that after his sermon last week. So we, hopefully you have been reading through the Bible with us. We've been looking every week at kind of what we've been going. So even if you are not reading along with us, you're able to kind of go through the Bible with us. So today we're going to look a little bit about promises and about inheritance and kind of what comes from that. So last year, it's been just about a little bit over a year ago, Mark's mom passed away. And so if you have ever had a parent pass away or a grandparent pass away, you know that sometimes some inheritance, maybe a financial inheritance, different things come with you. Our family is a little morbid sometimes. So for years, Mark's mom has just lots of, she likes to go antiquing, and she had, just all kinds of stuff. And so Mark and his 2 siblings would put sticky notes on things that they wanted, years before she passed away. So it was a little morbid. But when she did pass away, we started looking at, some of those things that she had that were meaningful to us. And some things were worth money, and some things, weren't worth money. And so we started talking about what we would want, what we would want on our own. And my sister-in-law, went antique shopping with her, went all those things. So those things are meaningful. But to me, she had, so we have my mom, who has also passed away, and then Mark's mom were obviously my kids' grandparents. We're on both sides. My mom was very, let's go to the children's museum. Let's go on field trips. Let's do all the educational things. Let's, go to the park. And Mark's mom was, let's drink cherry Coke and have those orange peanuts and sit on the couch and just, rot, basically. So they got a very good balance between the two of them. But at Mark's mom's house, she had this huge, just big old cabinet that I'm sure, I'm not into antiquing, so it's got some kind of name to it. I don't really know, but it was this big old cabinet. And that's where all of the snacks were. And so my kids knew that instantly when they went to Granny's house, that they would go into the snack cabinet. And she had all of their favorite snacks in that snack cabinet. So to me, when I thought about things that I wanted after she passed away, it wasn't, valuable things. It was that snack cabinet, because that's what I want when I finally get to be a grandma, that I want my kids to be able to come into my house and rot on the couch and have all the snacks they want and be able to do all of those things. So sometimes when we think about the idea of inheritance and the things that come to us, it isn't necessarily always financial. Sometimes it's a little bit more emotional, the things. So I want us just to take about 2 minutes And we haven't done this for a while, so I know those of you that don't like to talk, you're just going to have to get over it right now. But I want you just to talk to somebody close to you just for a couple minutes and think about maybe something that you inherited, something that was given to you, or maybe something special that you would like in your family. So just talk to the people around you just a couple minutes about the idea of something that you maybe would want to inherit in your family. Okay, we're going to go ahead and come back. You can continue those conversations later if you were in the middle of something that you want to keep talking about. But like I said, we're going to look at that idea of inheritance today in the Old Testament. And to really understand what we're going to talk about today, we have to think about the idea of land. Now, if you have been reading the Old Testament with us, we've been in Numbers for a while. And Numbers talks a lot about land and the different allotments of lands and the different sizes and things. So for us today, if you wanted to buy a piece of land, Mark and I are building a house right now, and so we had to buy the plot of land. You can, go to the person that's selling it, buy that land, put money down, all the things, and it's yours to keep until you sell it. But that is not what was true in the Old Testament. In the Old Testament, the land was given, it was a divine piece of land that was given to you. So if you've been reading, and even if you haven't, what would happen is we had the Israelites who were traveling in the desert. They have left Egypt. They've been traveling in the desert for now 38 years. And God is telling them for each tribe, and then each clan, and then each family within that, what piece of land in the promised land that they were going to get. Now, for us, at least for me personally, I'll be completely honest, as I read that, it gets a little repetitive. It honestly gets a little boring sometimes because I'm thinking, oh great, like all this land again, we're talking about this land again. But imagine if it was you. Imagine if somebody came to you and said, okay, you are going to get this piece of land in the greater Evansville area. It would be very important to you to know, what streets border it, how big it's going to be, exactly what that piece of land was like. So for us, the book of Numbers, we might kind of skim through it, or it might not be the most exciting book for us, but for the Israelites, that was very important. It was actually a book that they would read again and again and again to make sure that they had these plots of land correct. And what's so important is that these were the people of the promise. So they were the Israelites. They were the chosen people. And if they did not receive a piece of the promised land, then they were not getting the promise from God. So it wasn't just this inheritance of the land, it was a piece of the promise of God. So if they were left out, it was like they were left out of this whole promise of God. And then in the year of Jubilee, so you would get this land, and in the year of Jubilee, which was every 50 years, then if you were to sell it, or if something were to happen and somebody would need to take it because you had debts, the year of Jubilee, everything was cleared, and so everything would go back to the initial owners. And so every 50 years, things would be set right. So that clan, that tribe would be able to keep that land and have possession of it. So I wanted us to have that background for what we're reading today. We're going to just read a short few verses today, but they're so important with this idea of looking at inheritance and promise. In this culture, the sons inherited everything. So if a father was to die and he had no sons, then that meant he had no heirs. So then that meant that his land, what did we do with the land that he had? So we're going to read about kind of how they talked about that. And we're going to read in Numbers 27. It might say 1 through 4 up here, but we're actually reading 1 through 11 today. I changed it a little bit last night. And we're going to be looking at a special set of daughters. So Numbers 27. The daughters of Zelophehad, son of Hepher, son of Gilead, the son of Machir, the son of Manasseh, belonged to the clans of Manasseh, son of Joseph. The names of the daughters were Melha, Noah, Galgal, Milcah, and Tirzah. They came forward and stood before Moses, Eleazar the priest, and the leaders of the whole assembly of the entrance of the tent of meetings, and said, "Our father died in the wilderness." Okay, so their father has passed away. He was not among Korah's followers who banded together against the Lord, but he died for his own sins and left no sons. Why should our father's name disappear from his clan because he had no son? Give us property among our father's relatives. So Moses brought their case before the Lord, and the Lord said to him, "What Zelophehad's daughters are saying is right. You must certainly give them property as an inheritance among their father's relatives, and give their father's inheritance to them. Say to the Israelites, if a man dies and leaves no sons, give his inheritance to his daughter. If he has no daughter, give his inheritance to his brothers. If he has no brothers, give his inheritance to his father's brothers. If his father has no brothers, give his inheritance to the nearest relative in his clan, that he may possess it. This is to have the force of the law for the Israelites, as the Lord commanded Moses." So you can see through this, even kind of after that they wanted to make sure how important this inheritance of land was, because it was the inheritance of the promise. So even after the daughters that we're talking about, they made sure that something was going to happen, that there was a line of succession there. So Zelophehad had 5 daughters. And I want us to first look at their names, because if we look at what their names mean in Hebrew, it's really interesting. So we have Mahlah, which means to move. Noah, which actually also means to move. That's a little different form of that. Gaga is to circle. Milcah is to walk. And Tirzah is to run. So we have all of those names up there, and all of those names have the idea of moving, of some kind of action, that they are taking action in some way, that they're initiating something. And these daughters are symbolized in that way, because they took action to something that they saw. So the problem was there was no sons, so there were no heirs, so there was no land. And when their father died, his name was just going to be blotted out. He wasn't going to be part of the clan anymore. And so they wanted to know, so what's going to happen to this piece of land that God promised to our father? What is going to happen to that? And the daughters came to Moses, and if you've read before, it doesn't say this, but we can take this from our reading before, is that Moses was kind of like what we would think of as a Supreme Court. Like there were levels before you got to Moses. His father-in-law actually put those in effect. And so they will have had to have already talked to quite a few people who weren't sure what to do before they got to Moses. So they come to Moses, and he doesn't really know what to do either. So he goes to the best place, which is God. And God says, they're right. Give the land to them. And notice, it's really important, God doesn't just say, oh, sure, they can live in that land, because we want to make sure that they're taking care of the land that was for their father. He says, give them the land. It is now theirs. They now have ownership of that land, which is very contrary to what was going on in the culture at this time. The reason that land was passed down to sons was because men were the ones that owned the land. So it was very important to get that he said, give them the land. Now, as I was studying this, I like to read lots of articles, listen to podcasts, all those things. And so I was reading, and so many just different people, scholars had written on how these daughters are actually the first feminists. And that's kind of what came out of this, is that, they're woman power and they're feminists and all of these things. And I agree with that to a point. So we do need to understand that others may not recognize that there is a problem until we speak up. And that is really important, because sometimes you may be in a position that you see something, or because of who you are, or something about you, you understand something and you can see something that other people cannot see. And these daughters were in a unique position to understand this, because their father had no sons, and so they were in the position to say, hey, so our father died, what are we supposed to do? And sometimes people aren't going to understand how bad a situation is until someone speaks up about that situation. And I can see this both ways. Some of us who are in situations like that need to speak up and need to say, hey, this is not right. This is not what should be happening. You may not even realize this, but this is not what should be happening. And then those of us that are in privileged situations, might have power in certain ways, need to listen, need to open our eyes, and need to champion others and speak up for them if they can't. And I believe that is one of the things that Jesus did so many times. He spoke up for the people that they saw as lowly, people that couldn't speak up for themselves. And so we as Christians need to champion other people. I was just about a week ago, I was in Minneapolis for the week at a Wesleyan Holiness Women's Clergy, to get all the words in there, convention there. And so it was 5 different denominations that ordain women. And sometimes, I'm just going to be honest, some of you have talked to me about this, I love things like that, and I also don't love things like that. I go both ways, because sometimes it can become a victim mentality, man-bashing kind of thing sometimes, and I am not about that at all. My story, and thankful to both my husband and to our church, my story is not like that at all. I have not felt oppression or anything like that being a woman in my position, but I know others have. And it was so interesting. I'm so glad that this last one, I wanted to just say that it was amazing that there was no of the victim, all that kind of stuff, but it was amazing to listen to other people's stories and see people who championed them and who spoke up for them. And also, just on top of that, the fact that it was in Minneapolis, and just, if you watch the news at all the things that have been going on in Minneapolis over the last few months, I, of course, sat in the front of all of our Uber drivers and got to know their whole life stories with all the Uber drivers. And every Uber driver that we had was, actually all the Uber drivers that we had were immigrants from African countries. And I loved listening to their stories, listening to, not just over the last few months, but things that had happened. So I do think that it is very important as Christians that we do speak up for wrong that we see, and also champion others who may not have a voice. Because remember, this was all male leadership at this time. And sometimes it's not. I don't believe that this male leadership kind of had it out for these daughters or anything like that. They just didn't think about it because, they just, the land would go to the sons, and they didn't really think about someone who didn't have sons until these daughters spoke out. So when the situation was brought to light, they were able to do the right thing and do something that was fair. So while I do agree that the daughters spoke out, spoke against this discrimination, I'm actually going to kind of go against some of the scholars that I read, so you can make your own decisions. But I honestly don't believe, when I look at these daughters, I don't think of them as the first feminists. That's not what I think that they were really concerned for. Because when they come to Moses and they come to the high priest, what they actually say is, why should our father's name disappear from his clan because he had no son? They are not worried about themselves. They're worried about their father's name, and they're worried about what's going to happen to their, not their father in the future, but the legacy of their father is actually what they're thinking about. So the demand on their lips isn't equality for themselves, it's their family, and equality for their family, for their father. So feminists, you can decide. I'm not really sure about that, but they are fearless, for sure. They are strong women, and they were not afraid to bring before, like I said, kind of what we would see as the Supreme Court, this issue that was important. They stood up for themselves for the right reasons, and they did it in the right way. They went to the governing body. They weren't, gossiping and talking all about, why don't we have land or anything like that. They went to the place that they were supposed to go. And I think it's really, really also important for us to think that they were still in the desert when this happened. Their father had passed away. This land was just the promised land at this time. They were not taking over that land yet. It was still just a promise from God. But they believed that promise so fiercely and had so much faith that they went to a higher governing body to make sure that their father's name was taken care of. They believed that they were going to get the promised land. They already put themselves in possession of the promise that God had given them. And I just want to wait for a minute because I want that to sink in, that they were not standing in this land and everybody was, grabbing their land and they were thinking, what about us? This was years before when God was saying, when you take over the promised land, these will be your pieces. And it was almost like a given that God had promised this, and so they were going to get it. They didn't even think about that part. They just wanted to make sure that their father's name was taken care of when they did reach the promised land. So in the Bible, these daughters, the names of these daughters are mentioned 5 times. And if you're where we're at, I know some are started a little bit at different times, but if you are where you're at in the reading, you have already heard their names twice. But they're going to keep going. But the 5 daughters are named, and I think it's really interesting because we don't know the name of Noah's wife. We don't know the name of Lot's wife. We don't know the name of the woman at the well in John 4. So all of these kind of important female characters, their name isn't mentioned. But these daughters, the 5 daughters, are mentioned 5 times. And 4 of those times, they say all 5 of their names. So that shows how important, not just that they're the daughters, but individually their importance to God and their unshakable faith. And they believed, like I said, this promised land, and it's a little bit hard for us to understand, but this land was not just a place for them to be and to reside. The land actually was tied to this divine promise from God, that God would be with them, that God would be their God for all time. So if someone was left out of having this land, they would be left out of the promise. And these daughters had such faith that they believed so dearly in that promise before it happened. Rather than focusing on the hopelessness of the situation, on the idea that their father died, on the idea that they wouldn't get land, on the idea that they were 38 years at this time in the desert, instead of focusing on the hopelessness of their situation, these women looked forward in faith. Now, there is a Hebrew word called emunah. And what this word is it describes a steadfast trust. Just a trust that is deep, deeply there. And a steadfast trust in God's goodness and his promises, even when the circumstances seem impossible. So imagine that you are there, and you are one of these daughters. And I don't know how long it takes to go through the different kind of courts sort of to get to Moses, but I'm sure it took a while to get there. And they are thinking, and I can almost feel the panic that they know they're going to take this land. They know that God is going to give them this land. And they are ready to take it, but they want to know. They have such steadfast faith, this emunah, that they know that even though it feels impossible, because no other women had ever inherited land, that God will make a way for them. So he comes to them, and they have this faith, this steadfast emunah faith. They didn't just believe in the promised land in theory. They believed that it was applicable to them personally. They knew that they were going to get this. And it didn't matter the societal norms, the traditions, anything. They knew that they would be able to come and get this. And I want us to think about that for us today, that I believe that God has promises for all of us. And I just listened, this actually isn't in my notes, so bear with me for a minute, but I listened to a podcast yesterday, and I thought it was so interesting for those of you that grew up in church. And I know that's not all of us, but just for just a minute, I just want to speak to those of you that grew up in church. Sometimes we had this cause and effect kind of faith that if I did whatever, then God would do whatever. Like we had a little deal going on. And so if I kept my part of the bargain, then God would keep his part of the bargain. And I have focused on thinking about God's grace and about how I don't have to do anything besides just give my life to him, but I don't have to do anything. I don't have to work for his grace, that his promises are there for me. But it's also sometimes, I think, on the other side, that we get God's principles and God's promises kind of mixed up, because it's true that we don't have to work for God's promises. 100% true. But I think sometimes in our mind, we also believe, well, I read my Bible, I went to church, I brought my kids to church, I did all of these things, so now, God, it's your turn. You need to hold up your end of the deal. And we have this cause and effect theology that some of us, like I said, if you've grown up in church, sometimes that has come on us. And I just listened to that podcast last night, and it really spoke to me about this, is that we have to make sure when we are thinking about God's promises and thinking about the things that he has for us, because we are the promised people. We just talked in Sunday school today that we are adopted into his promised people. We are part of his family, and he has promises to us. But there's not a cause and effect. It's not a deal that we make with God. We don't have to do anything for it besides live for him, but we can't also just expect from him because we do his principles. Does that make sense? I need some looks from you guys as a teacher, because when we look, because what I'm going to ask you to do in a minute is I'm going to ask you to think about if there are some promises that you feel like God has given you, and you are stepping in to those promises. Just like these daughters, they knew the land was for them. They knew the land was coming. They were out in the desert. They didn't know how long it was going to be before they got to that land. They didn't even know if it was going to be for their children. It might not even be for them, but they knew that it was coming. And as you think about these promises, I want you to think about some biblical promises that it's not promises that you're going to have the best happy life. That is not what God promises. God promises that you are going to have a life overflowing with love for him. It's going to come with hardships, but he's going to be there with you. He's going to be there with you every step, no matter what happens. So in your bulletin, you have a couple of questions. I'm going to give us some time and have Kaden play, and just give us some time to think about these questions. Are there areas in your life right now that you are struggling to trust in God's promises? Have you been going through something and you just don't see God in it, and you're wondering where he is, and you're struggling with that promise that he's with you? And the second question, how can I cultivate a deeper sense of trust in God's faithfulness? We might know with our head, I think we talked about this a couple weeks ago, we might know with our head that God is faithful and that he gives us what he promises us. But to take that from knowledge, from information, to transformation in our heart is sometimes really difficult to really believe that. So what can you do? Remember, it's not a transaction, but are there things that you can do? Are there people that you can talk to help you have that better faith? I'm going to wait just about a minute and give you some time just to write, to think about that, to kind of let God talk to you about that, and then we're going to pray together. to you today. And first, thank you so much for the promises that you give us. And we thank you that the promises that you have are for every single person that you created. We first want to come to you and just help us open our eyes if there are injustices that we see or that we hear about or that have happened to us. Help us have the courage and the faith to speak up for those, to speak up for ourselves, to speak up for others that we see, because we know how important everyone is to you, and we know how Jesus saw everyone as a creation. So first, help us speak up. Help us have the fearlessness of these daughters to speak up for something that was wrong. But then help us. I know you have general promises for the body of Christ, for your bride, but you have specific promises for each one of us. Help us discern those promises. Help us understand what those promises are, and have the faith to rest in them, and the faith to, if we're struggling, to come to people, to come to you, to figure out and help us have the faith of these daughters that your promise will come to be in our lives, because you are so good to us. You are such a good Father, and you love us so much that is what you want for us. Help us as we go throughout our week to both have those open eyes and the open hearts to your promises. We love you so much. In your name, amen.